Welcome to another session of GuruTalk. My name is Professor Ramani Subramanian. We have a very fascinating subject for discussion this morning, and the subject is called, Is Media Becoming Too Powerful? We have a very eminent and distinguished panel of speakers who will take you through the subject with their viewpoints. At the moment, I'll briefly introduce the panel to you, but as and when the speaker makes his specific presentation, I shall elaborate on some of his points. We have Mr. Siddharath Raja, who represents the legal profession, and we have Dr. Vinod Vyasalu, who is an eminent economist, a teacher, a writer himself. And on my right, we have a specialist from the media, Mr. Veeraraghav. He is currently the resident editor of the national daily called the Hindu. Now, as I mentioned, it's a fascinating subject, and each one of us have one view or the other on it. To a person like me, I always thought media was a very powerful weapon. I remember in pre-independent India, the Britishers who ran the press represented one aspect of the Indian movement, which I think hastened the Indian independence movement. Certainly, I believe that the Vietnamese war was brought to an end by television, because television brought the gory scenarios of scenes like My Lai in Vietnam, the massacres that took place, the atrocities that took place, and parents in America wondered what their kids were doing, fighting a war on which they didn't know how to fight. And this certainly led to a quick conclusion of the war, which I think was one of the tragedies of the 20th century. Again, from the India I and Dr. Vinod come from, the radio was a very powerful medium. I think none of us went to sleep without listening to the 9 o'clock news of All India Radio, given by the iconic voice of Melville de Mello, who was Mr. All India Radio to us. In post-liberalization India, the media has of course become very, very voluble. But I also feel there is some scope for misunderstanding of the role media is playing. We all heard very recently about a certain amount of disenchantment with media in Nepal. I don't want to repeat the details. But here's a very interesting story I read in the Times of India about a couple of weeks back about a devotee who found a key ring in a Tirupati laddu that he had bought. And he was advised to bring this to the notice of the Devasthana. But he said that, if I do that, maybe they will not investigate and come back to me as to how it happened. So I will take it to the media. So thereby comes the feeling that, if you want any wrongs to be redressed, if you want something to be highlighted, media is the right place for you to take it. And when we talk about media today, I think we are talking more about television, the electronic media. These are my viewpoints. But to examine all these very carefully, we have the expert panel, and I will now request Mr. Veeraraghav to make the first presentation. As I mentioned, I want to say a few words about Mr. Veeraraghav. Mr. TM Veeraraghav is currently the resident editor of the Hindu. He started his journalistic journey with television in 2000. He worked with two leading news broadcasters in India, Network 18 and NDTV, starting as a correspondent with NDTV and reporting from the states of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and Gujarat. Later in 2005, he was part of a core team that put together the new channel CNN-IBN and was a senior editor and anchor in that channel, based in New Delhi. Veeraraghav has been associated with some of the most moving events of political and social nature as a journalist. He covered the 2002 riots and post-riot issues in Gujarat. He covered the 2004 tsunami and its after effects in Tamil Nadu. He was deeply concerned with the Sinhala Tamil conflict in Sri Lanka, caste and communal conflict in South India. May I present to you Mr. Veeraraghav.
Thank you, sir. That was just the resume. So, I wasn't expecting to speak first. I was hoping that I would defend the media last. But the topic itself, is the media too powerful now? It sort of resonates a sense of worry about the media being too powerful. I find that a little ironic because if we are really a great democracy, then we should be technically having a media which is extremely powerful. So the question is, possibly paraphrased further to say whether is the media too powerful or are journalists becoming too powerful? Individual journalists and opinion makers becoming too powerful? In a lighter sense, is it journalism that's too powerful, or is it Arnab Goswami who's too powerful? So when you get down to that, you realize that the problem that we're trying to speak about is on ownership of the media and how the media's agendas are dictated by a set of people who have other corporate or political agendas. And hence there is a worry about whether the media is now becoming too powerful in representing those agendas. Professor Ramani spoke about the Vietnam War. Yes, true. The US government was possibly not aware of the power of the media at that time, but since Vietnam, much has changed around the world, and you've got governments and corporates with the ability to control, own, and influence the media in their own ways. So the danger here is not that the media is powerful, but the media is representing an agenda that is extremely powerful. If the media was representing the agenda of the people and it was powerful, then I don't think it should concern us at all in a democracy. So we draw that fine line of distinction there. Now, having said that, why has the media become, why has that agenda has the ability to find so much power through the media? Obviously, I think we still have a level of trust within the media, and if a particular aspect or a particular opinion is repeated over and over and over again in the media, it forms the basis of a debate in the society, which then influences the political decision in a democracy. Given that context, let's just look back and see how things worked out in India itself. Professor Ramani spoke about the independence movement. Let's go further down towards the emergency era, 75 to 77. You had severe press censorship, but you still had a certain section of the media which said it would run blank editorials, it would speak against the government, and then there was a political movement that sort of compelled the media to also reflect to a large extent the excesses of the government. Now, did the media create that political movement, or did the political movement pressure the media into submission of trying to take on a government which was dictatorial? It was the political movement that pushed the media into taking on the government that was dictatorial. Some parts of the media just represented the government in a very unashamed way. Now, take that forward now to 2014. Did we have the media create influence against a particular government? Or was the media representing the will of the people and their angst against a government? You had one personality who was chief minister of a state, who was projected as the solution to every evil in the country at that point of time. Now, was that the media's projection consciously, or was that the people's sentiment that was reflected in the media? Did opinion polls and surveys actually reflect the mood on the ground, or did they influence and create a further opinion on the ground that this is the solution to it? Now, you can have two very different points of views. But the danger here is to understand that a media can influence through opinion polls and through its own collection of information, an agenda for the country. It can dictate and it can put together and it can make an opinion that this is the public sentiment. Now, what kind of guarantee do we have that a particular media house is not going to genuinely reflect an opinion on the ground? What guarantee do we have that a particular media house is not going to be reflecting a particular political opinion or a corporate agenda and make it sound like it is the agenda of the people? Now, the only guarantee that you can have is to know who owns the media. And unfortunately in India, we still do not have strong cross-ownership restrictions. If you look at the last 10 years and the number of television channels, both regional, national, that have come up, and the small newspapers that have come up, 90 to 95% of them have been launched or owned by people with political or influential business backing. And we have had no restriction on who can enter and own the media, who can be given a license. In fact, there was a debate on paid news about 4 years ago, and the irony was that the press council could not come out with the report on paid news because media owners did not want the press council to come out with the report on paid news. Now, in such a situation where owners control most of what goes out in the media, then it's extremely important that we have strong cross-ownership and ownership restrictions on who can enter the media and why they have entered the media. Is that possible? Will we evolve towards that? And I think that's the crux of the issue when we want to answer, is the media become too powerful? Frankly, the media has not become too powerful. It's an ownership agenda that has become extremely powerful, and the media is just a vehicle to represent that ownership agenda. Can a media create a riot? Can a media control a riot? Well, those are, yes, different forms of questions. At some level, mass mediums have their own limitations. If you have a riot situation, can the media spurn a riot? Can the media push things forward? Well, those are things that will be tested from time to time. But frankly, those are not the core issues. The core issues are when it comes to the stock markets, when it comes to political agendas, and in every way, Chomsky's filters are in complete operation in India at the moment. And I think there lies the core of the issue. So if you're going to address it, the first thing that needs to be done is to crack down on ownership issues and have a very clear rule in law like Ofcom does in the UK. It's happened in other countries. And then we look at how public funded exercises, how guaranteed public funded exercises where the revenue for the media comes from the people and from the state. Because as long as the revenue is going to come from the corporate world, and as long as revenue and your monetary investments are going to be dictated by people who have an agenda, then you will have a situation where the media's agenda will be reflecting theirs. That's pretty much the nutshell of what I'd like to say.
Okay. Maybe you could add a point or two as the discussion goes along later on, if you have anything to offer. Sure. Doctor, would you like to? I have great pleasure in introducing Dr. Vinod Vyasalu. Dr. Vinod is currently advisor in the Center for Information Technology and Public Policy in IIT Bangalore. He has taught in the Indian Institute of Management, IIM Bangalore, Institution of Social and Economic Change, Bangalore, XLRI, and Jharkhand. Though I did not know Dr. Vinod in St. Stephen's College, from where I also come, I have heard that he was one of the key founders of a school, of a college newsletter called GuruTalk. And I think that was Dr. Vinod's first foray into journalism. Dr. Vinod, would you like to make your presentation?
Thank you, Professor Ramani. I wasn't editor of the GuruTalk. That goes to Manishankar Iyer.
Okay.
But I was editor of the Stephanian, which is another more serious kind of magazine. Anyway, the topic is the media becoming too powerful? The media, of course, is a very complex thing. We tend to think of media as television, and English television largely. But it's much more complex than that. We have so many languages in the country, each with publications and reporting of its own. We have a lot of NGOs in the communication business that highlight the plight of specific sectors of our society. But in asking this particular question, I think the focus is much more on the television channels, particularly the English and Hindi in that order. So as we go on, we should say that much of what we are saying may apply to one part of the media, not necessarily all the media. The other word in the title is powerful. If you look up power in the dictionary, you will find it says it is the ability that some people have to influence the opinions of others. However, we are not using it in that sense. We are asking this question because we seem to think that this thing called the media is powerful in the sense that it has the ability to misdirect or misguide people in a particular direction. And I think we should look at the sources of this perception as we go along. Now, a lot has been said about the kind of views propagated. Veeraraghav has talked about the ownership issue, which does bias news. But we are a very complex country. I don't think it is either the owners who bias the news or the people who bias. I think all these influences are playing out simultaneously. And at different times, one force is more powerful than the other. The issue of the emergency was a very interesting one. Because initially, after the emergency was imposed, there was some resistance, the blank editorials that you referred to. But then the government came up with what they thought was, we don't want censorship, but we advise the press to self-censor what they publish. In a sense, almost scaring you, saying that if we disagree with what you censor, there will be consequences. And there was a period of time in which the press, at that time it was the print press, more or less caved in. Later what happened was that the events that took place, the atrocities that took place were so large that they couldn't be hidden any longer. So there were phases during the emergency from initial resistance to a kind of caving in, to a kind of renewed vigor in opposing the government, which was in part because the press felt that they had been cowed down earlier and therefore they came out fighting much harder. But what was remarkable about that was this was across the country, across whatever the media was at that time, language media, press, magazines, whatever. At that time, there was really no significant television, so I don't know what would have happened.
Fortunately.
At that point in time. Now, we've also got examples where the media has turned out to be horribly wrong. In our elections, for example, the predictions, the polls, they got it wrong. And this is a global phenomenon because most recently in the UK elections, they got it wrong as well. So, opinion polls are based upon certain statistical samples, they're based upon trying to predict how people are going to vote based upon a statistical sample and on the assumption that people will tell you what they're going to do. Both can be questioned. I was very surprised to learn that in the United States, the polls predicting the results of presidential election have a sample size of about 3,000 people. It's just 3,000 for a country as large as the United States. And that's because it is not a heterogeneous country like India. In India, on a sample of 3,000, you will not be able to predict the results of the Bangalore Municipal Corporation polls. There are far too many sections, too many languages, too many caste groups, too many interests. And if you want a proper sample, you got to do this. If I remember some of the television channels that predict national elections at the state level, I think the smallest sample was about 22,000.
Allegedly.
Roughly. No, but at least it recognizes that the size of the sample is dependent upon the diversity in society. This is an important point because whose interest in this huge diversity does the media represent? Ownership is one question. And there is a point of worry because television channels now are getting increasingly owned by media houses. They change ownership, they change hands. But unfortunately, all the billionaires that the IT revolution has produced in this country have not thought of putting aside some fund into an independent trust that could run, say, newspapers or television channels. One of the things we need is something like that. We have a model in the BBC. If you have a television in Britain, you pay a license fee. That license fee goes to the BBC. And that is the source of funding. And the BBC is fairly independent. We know that because it's upset our government, it's upset the British government, it's upset everybody. And therefore it must be fairly okay somewhere along the line. The other thing that's wrong with the current media, and this point was made by Veeraraghav earlier, is an excessive focus on a few indicators as if they reflect the health of this country. What happens to the Bombay Sensex affects a few 100,000 people. But if you listen to the TV channels, it is as if the country is going up or down based upon. And there's a lot of hype in how this is presented. On an index, on a Sensex of roughly 30,000, a 500-point drop is described as a crash. It's minuscule, it is nothing. 500 on an index of 1,000 is a crash, but 500 on 30,000 is not a crash. So there is a lot of this kind of hype that we have to filter out as we go along. The other point that I would like to make about the media is the pressures on people in the media. If people have careers there, they want to go up, they want to go through. And how do they do it? You have to get audiences, you have to get TRPs, you have to get various kinds of things. And at some point, it is very easy to go with the crowd, go with it. And Mr. Arnab Goswami's famous tirade, the people of India want to know. I mean, it would have been honest if he said Arnab Goswami wants to know. But my question is, I'm not even sure Arnab Goswami wants to know. And he's just asking a question because he thinks that is popular. And in this, we are missing out a huge chance. The other choices that people make on what they want to report. Mr. Togadia gives a speech somewhere saying throw the Muslims out of India. Why should this be reported at all? After all, there is a limited amount of time on any channel. And there are lots of things happening in the country. I mean, you might as well report the fact that there was a rape in Manipur rather than Mr. Togadia. So to this extent, the choices that we make also reflect either the biases of ownership or the biases of individual reporters or something larger in society. I don't know which it is, maybe all three. So I think there is a need in this point in time for people in the media to exercise some kind of responsibility. I mean, this is almost going back to the old Gandhian variety that be the change you want to be. Act in a particularly... but if you do that, then you have to be prepared not to have a cushy job in a big channel and you'll be running around. Even in those who have been reporting on the oppressed have been forced to leave papers. I'm sure people have been reading the columns of Sainath. He had to leave the Hindu. So these kind of things do happen, and I'm not very upset about it because this is what happens in other sectors as well. Somebody who challenges the managing director of a company will not find it very comfortable working in that company. So overall, when we are talking about is the media too powerful, we have to be careful about what we mean by media, we have to be careful what we mean by powerful, and the being question. This is more philosophical. Are we asking this because it's becoming now what it wasn't earlier? Are we asking because it could become less powerful? But that would depend on a whole lot of other forces. To that extent, as Marshall McLuhan said, the medium is the message. And much of what is happening is part of the larger technological kind of revolution. One of the things that technology has done is speed up the process of communication. Messages go back and forth, more messages go back and forth. And there is a huge overload. How do we sort out what is important from what is trivial? And in this process, the reporters and the anchors in the television channels play an important role. What they think is important will come up. That's not necessarily what is important. And that is why I think we always need mechanisms by which correctives come. And I would focus on what these correctives are, where they come from, and leave that open for debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your point of view, Dr. Vinod. I will now request Siddharath Raja to take the floor. Briefly about Siddharth. Siddharth represents the legal profession, and I suppose he will demonstrate a little bit of legal viewpoint on the subject. Siddharth had a very brilliant career at the National Law School University, where he took an honors and got a scholarship, a shaving scholarship, to complete his master's at the University of Warwick. He was also a Jain Tata scholar, if I'm not mistaken. After he finished his advanced master's course in the UK, he came and worked in India briefly, and then he represented India's interests in a MNC based in Hong Kong. And there he saw the transformation of the British colony becoming a part of mainland China. So he has seen a great deal of media coverage during that period. We are delighted to have Siddharth with us. Over to you, Siddharth.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. Glad to be here. When Mr. Subramanian asked me to join this panel about the media, what came to my mind, and I said I should talk about it, is two instances of my interaction with the media, early interactions with the media, which still stay in my mind. I remember I was in school when Mrs. Gandhi, well, I should say Mrs. Indira Gandhi, was assassinated. And the image still stands in my mind as I walked home, and I walked in through the door at about midday, of my father sitting in front of his old radio, tuning in to the BBC, and in those days it was Mark Tully in Delhi, who actually made the announcement that she was no more. And I mean, that's a very powerful image which still stays in my mind. And then 4 years later, I actually got hold of that same radio. It was given to me like a bequest almost. And the years 89 to 90 was a fascinating time to be able to tune into BBC in particular, with the fall of the wall, the Berlin Wall, and the collapse of communism. And what caught my mind at that time, there was a particular instance which occurred in December of 1989. And it showed, to my mind, in the context of our session today, the extent of the media's influence. We talk today of how, if there's a disaster which occurs, we have, the electronic media all over, so the televisions. There are people reporting from ABC Place, they're all over the particular story. I remember at about 4 o'clock in late December 89, I tuned into the radio, and the BBC was reporting, World Service was reporting, that a crowd had gathered around the presidential palace in Bucharest, in Romania, to try and force the then Romanian dictator, Ceausescu, and his wife from power. And he was holed up in his palace, and he was surrounded by these crowds. And an hour later, when I tuned back into that same radio station, they had 6 reporters reporting, one from Bucharest, one from a place called Timișoara, and from other places in the region as well, including London and Washington, because he had been toppled within that 1 hour. And so, the media was, to my mind, even in those days, powerful. And as rightly been pointed out by the previous speakers, power itself is a very strange kind of animal which can be spoken of in different facets. I'd like to actually read to you something which I found written over 150 years ago, in February of 1852, talking about the role and responsibility of the press vis-a-vis the political establishment. And I'll read this to you. This is from the Times of London. The press lives by disclosures. Whatever passes into its keeping becomes a part of the knowledge and history of our times. It is daily and forever appealing to the enlightened force of public opinion, anticipating if possible the march of events, standing upon the breach between the present and the future, and extending its survey to the horizon of the world. The politician's duty is precisely the reverse. He cautiously guards from the public eye the information by which his actions and opinions are regulated. He reserves his judgment of passing events till the latest moment, and then he records it in obscure or conventional language. The duty of one is to speak, of the other to be silent. The one explains itself in discussion, the other tends to action. The one deals mainly with rights and interests, the other with opinions and sentiments. The former is necessarily reserved, the latter essentially free. It follows therefore from this contrast that the responsibilities of the two powers are as much at variance as their duties. For us, with whom publicity and truth are the air and light of existence, there can be no greater disgrace than to recoil from the frank and accurate disclosure of facts as they are. We are bound to tell the truth as we find it without fear of consequences, to lend no convenient shelter to acts of injustice and oppression, but to consign them once to the judgment of the world. If the public writer shares in any degree and influence of the statesman, he shares at least few of these personal objects which constitute so large a part of ordinary statesmanship. The responsibility he really shares is more nearly akin to that of the economist or the lawyer, whose province is not to frame a system of convenient application to the exigencies of the day, but to investigate truth and to apply it on fixed principles to the affairs of the world. February 7th, 1852. Now, as a lawyer, in right through law school and then subsequently, it was clear that, the media, as I said, is to be the fourth pillar of the democratic system. And there are several well-known Supreme Court judgments talking of the need to preserve our fundamental right of freedom of expression, which the media is said to represent. Now, I think it's very clear, as Veeraraghav mentioned, that I don't think it's a question of power at all. It's a question of the ability to continue to do what you are mandated to do, which is, to my opinion, talk about facts, regulate opinions, and try and get at the truth. And so to some extent, therefore, when you talk of is it becoming more powerful, the function of that power is essentially a function of the strength of the media. Over here, there is no doubt that, as has been adverted to earlier, some of the press barons or the media barons sometimes make themselves more powerful and can dictate agendas, but that's always been the case. Right through the 30s and the 40s, the English media was controlled by a handful of media barons. In particular, I think his name was Lord Beaverbrook, who was one of the guys who was behind the Times, for instance. So it's a question of finding the space. Media today in India is not, is also, let's not forget, the influence that independent quote-unquote media plays in this country. Things like, the online and the virtual space media opinions, in places like new and emerging kind of discussion areas and publications like Fountain Ink, which is a very interesting thing, or even EPW for that matter, can lend to the debate and the discourse in very powerful ways. So I wouldn't say it's a question of media becoming too powerful. I suspect it's always a question of, are you continuing to go back and ask the right questions? Some things that we don't find a lot in the electronic media today. If you just compare, and I'm not trying to say that it's just the West versus us, but the ability to form and frame a question to ask of, say, a panelist today, it's shocking the levels to which people are unable to ask decent questions. And then you look at, say, for example, a talk like Hard Talk, where it comes with, a proper curated kind of questions. Karan Thapar is a good example of having some curated questions as well. But it's, this is the kind of strength that one needs to really develop within media. And if those things become more powerful, then as this piece talks about, you focus on the telling of the facts. History, of course, is always about facts. There's a huge debate that goes on. You can never tell a fact without it being colored by some opinion. But then to curate and regulate this opinion, ultimately to try and get at the truth, is I think the key aspect of the media today. It's not becoming powerful at all. It's being misdirected in some cases. And it's absolutely important that it continues to do what it does. It plays its role. It may scream and shout. You might have slanging matches. You may not like it, but I think it's very critical that we continue to engender that sense. It's in some respects, Veeraraghav talked about it. You toe the line, right? And you mentioned it, sir. The emergency. Lal Krishna Advani made that famous statement. You were asked to kneel, but you chose to crawl, right? Self-censorship, sometimes you have this outpouring, we are surprisingly, we're only about a month away from the 40th anniversary of the emergency being imposed, and we are about 10 days away from the first anniversary of this government. I'm not trying to suggest that there's a link between the two, but, in my own view, I think, this whole idea, and you see a lot of stuff written about new dispensations, etc., how good they've been and what they've done. The free and frank discussion sometimes really needs to be infused with all those facts and information that sometimes is missing in the search for truth. I think I'll stop with that. And, I'd actually just end by saying, from a legal perspective, it's absolutely clear that the media, it's enshrined in our constitution. It's very clear that they have to continue to play that role, which is the ability to have a free and frank disclosure and discussion. And anything that goes against that must be struck down with force, to some extent, if a media does its job well, then you actually strengthen the other arms of government, especially the judiciary, in doing their job as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Siddharth, for your point of view. I have just one question to ask, and I address it to each one of the three panelists, because I need this clarification. I'm sure many of the students will also share with me that this clarification will be welcome. In all these television programs that we see, including the interviews, there seems to be some sort of a built-in system of getting the points of view of opposite people aired. This gives an opportunity for the various parties involved in the debate to throw acrimonious remarks, and the whole thing becomes a little distasteful, not very pleasant. Whereas I should imagine media should get across a sensitive point of view in a constructive manner. May I
First, this is just letting you in on the trade secret.
Okay.
But before I let you in on the trade secret, I just want to, add to what Siddharth said. Siddharth said towards the end that the media is actually becoming weak. The truth is that the media is trying to act very powerful because its core has become very weak. It's like the old statement that says that this is not the time to act strong, but to be strong. And the fact is that within the media, within journalism, the core has become weak. And I believe that within our society as a whole, the core has become weak. Our democracy has become weak. And let's not look at this as just a media issue. Let's look at it beyond that. Now, number two, you take it too seriously.
Okay.
The idea is not to get two different points of view. The idea is to have entertainment, because they are competing with. Arnab Goswami is not competing with Rajdeep Sardesai anymore. Arnab Goswami is competing with Saas Bhi Kahi Bahuti for his TRPs. So please understand that it's become a business. 99%, and I don't want to pinpoint one individual or another individual. Ultimately, the idea of a television show is not to bring out great journalism, because people don't have the time for great journalism. You take Twitter, you take News Laundry, you will only see, you will have a website thriving on interviewing one journalist over his relationship with another journalist. Now, how does it matter to India or to the country or to anything in this country if two egomaniacs are going to be fighting with each other? Why should that be a matter of debate, and why should that be a website with 1 million hits? You know, a spoof on Arnab Goswami will have 1 million hits. You put out a serious issue on that same thing on the website, you will not have those hits. So it is entertainment. And let's also look at how the ratings are there. You know, which journalist, which television anchor has got Padma Shri? Arey, he's got Padma Shri, you need to give me Padma Shri. That government gave him Padma Shri, you give this government Padma Shri. Now, so ultimately, let's also, you know, remember that as a society, we like these models. We like these people who act very powerful, who are getting that thing and say that he's a great journalist. You walk down on the streets and ask people, who do you think is the best journalist in India? They'll immediately say Arnab Goswami, because they don't know anybody else. So ultimately, you know, I think you and I are taking it far too seriously in terms of why are they trying to get two opposing points of view. No, they are not. They are trying to get two idiots to fight on TV so that it can be watched very well. So, frankly, that's the bottom line.
I fully agree.
You have
in the
no
law,
idea.
you know, it's completely it's true. In the law, it is said that a hard case makes the worst law, right? So I remember a debate on the death penalty, right, on one of these channels, where you have the family of a victim of murder or rape, right, on that program. And then you have, as you said, a whole of these people who have these very divergent views. You're not going to get the best debate on it, on the nuances of why the death penalty, what is the, you know, and all of that. Because, I mean, it's like this insensitive question that someone has been going about in the newspapers and in the press, that someone stuck a mic in front of the face of a survivor of the Nepal earthquake and said, your son is lying under the pile of things, what do you feel? I mean, it's the same thing. You stick a mic in front of the family of a rape victim who's been murdered and say, do you want the death penalty? I mean, you're going to get an answer which is obvious, isn't it? But then the nuanced debate is gone completely, right? Perhaps the medium itself doesn't allow you to do that. Take, for example, again an online medium which has a more esoteric audience, say for example EPW, or what's the other one place? I think it's called Scroll.
Yeah.
You know, which has these a little more nuanced debates about these things. It doesn't get the kind of attention, but hopefully and critically, I hope that level of debate, for example, on say the death penalty, is then percolating through to the relevant other wings of government, like the judiciary, like the executive, because if you look at the media as the fourth limb of government, its job is not to be just out there and influencing public opinion. It's also to look inward and back to the other wings of government and say, listen, I've got to you a certain curated opinion. This is the view of society. This is the forum where academics and others are expressing the view. Now take this into account. Does Parliament even look at these issues, for instance, by, you know, when it say, for example, take the land bill, it's gone now to a select panel. You know, and you have all these shrill debates that have been going on, you know, on various channels. It depends on the orientation of the channel. If you have a business channel, you pile the panel with 4 industrialists. The first point will be, I want land, right? Or you have a farmers leader out there who will give you the exact dramatic. It's a bad situation to get any kind of law, but then any kind of legal policy out of it. You have to funnel that in. We haven't become that economy, that country, sorry. To say that, because you know it's a much more nuanced debate that must go on, and I think it all stems, as Veeraraghav rightly said, from the inherent problems and weaknesses that exist in all limbs of our government: judiciary, executive, legislative, and the media. You know, and I look at the media as an important prop to that entire structure. You know, which is why it has failed to.
It's been propped up by that structure.
Yeah.
No, you know, the point that you're making very interesting. Just a very simple, you know, just a small add-on to it. In the UK, for instance, Ofcom mandates that, look, if you have an election, you have to give this much space to each political party. Now, you cannot digress from that. You can only have this much advertisements. there is a very strict law that Ofcom puts out saying that, look, this is the deal. Leave the BBC aside. BBC model will not work in India.
Right.
Al Jazeera model, Al Thani, we don't have a guy like Al Thani who's going to write off $1 billion check. Our corporate, our IT czars, even if they write a check off, they're going to say represent Bangalore's agenda. They're going to say BPAC will have Bangalore specific elections. So it doesn't matter what happens in Chamarajnagar. 40 people can die. BPAC doesn't care because BPAC wants to have Bangalore. So we've become that urban thing. So leave that models aside. The point is that there has to be a law. Ultimately, if I'm going to report on 2G scam and I'm going to have advertisements from Reliance ADAG group, it's my job to disclose to the viewer that, look, boss, my channel is owned by this person. My channel is owned by that person. Now, who can do that? The society has to do that. The system has to do that. The media is misbehaving. You tame the media. You use move. There have been efforts to move in the Supreme Court, efforts to say, please disclose ownership. Disclose who owns you. Because in a family-run media house, you don't even know where the money is coming from. So, given these things, I'm just saying that there needs to be, the only solution to it is because the media, it's a chicken and egg thing. Did the system prop the media up, or does the media push the system to do something? Now, in this chicken and egg, we need to realize that the media needs to represent a particular job. If let's say doctors, a hospital is going to start off, no matter how much they may want to make money, ultimately the job of the hospital is to save lives or bring healthcare down there. So you have certain rules on that. That same way, the media needs to be told that these are the rules under which the game can be played. You play your game, you have your ownership, but these are the rules. You have to give this much proportion of time for this particular state. Each state, each part of the country needs to be given this much proportion of time. Find your own time. If you are going to use a yardstick on death penalty on Afzal Guru, that same yardstick should be used on Rajiv Gandhi's assassins.
Correct.
You cannot have two separate yardsticks.
Correct.
Now, nobody is questioning those. I'm saying that unfortunately the debate has dumbed down to whether the media is powerful or not, but not towards how we have reacted to the media. We've just lapped it up. We love it. We've just taken it up as a society and we've lapped it up. And so I'm continuing to sell because I'm making my money.
But Veeraraghav, how do we deal with the questions that are not asked? You see, a lot of what you're saying is information not either voluntarily given or not asked for. For example, you mentioned the Land Acquisition Act. Nobody's asking, do we need the Land Act? The United States doesn't have such an act. It's got all kinds of industry, companies buy land. Why is it that you go back to the colonial power of the state, eminent domain, pass a law to take away land? Why not the market work? I mean, this is a government that says we believe in the market. But when it comes to this, and nobody's asking this question of do we need this law at all?
How do you make the media ask that question? Very, very simple thing. Iraq War 1991, there was nothing that came out. It was treated as as this major entertainment thing of live television. But in the Afghanistan, after the 26/11 attack, after the 9/11 attacks, the US was not able to carry out the way it did, despite all those things. You had a US ambassador who went out, you had a David Kelly report in the UK. How did all this start coming out? Because of a channel called Al Jazeera, which started representing, like Edward Said's, covering Islam down the line. Al Jazeera started representing another point. In India, you need a channel which is funded by, as you are saying, I wouldn't believe the IT czars. I'm saying public funded a trust, which launches and which puts out, and because the media is also very scared. If one guy starts speaking the truth, the rest of them will be forced to speak the truth because they will be looking ugly now.
See, I mean, you take, so if I can you take the experiment called the Helka, from 15 years ago. I think the idea was to be able to have that independent view, and for the longest time ever, the difference has always been between journalism and then investigative journalism. When I was growing up in school, the big issue for the day, coming from your paper, was Chitra Subramaniam's Bofors, right? But that is essential journalism, isn't it, ultimately? The ability, as I said here, the responsibility he really shares is more nearly akin to that of the economist or the lawyer, whose province is not to frame a system of convenient application to the exigencies of the day, but to investigate truth and to apply it on the fixed principles to the affairs of the world. So the ability to ask those searching questions, to determine, it's fact finding. We don't have that ability in large parts of the media, electronic and otherwise. Even editorial pieces that you find in newspapers today is merely stating a point of view. Someone told me yesterday, we keep hearing all these complaints. Oh, Bangalore's roads are problematic. Tender show project is the road is smaller than the footpath. Opinions expressed about all of this. But where is someone saying, this is the facts of the tender show project? I know there are a few people who are actually saying that, but that hasn't become part of the mainstream debate. This is what tender show aims to do. Even from a historical perspective, we talk about, oh, Bangalore's roads are poor, the things are fraying. No one is saying this road, MG Road, was first built. There's no fact about the whole thing, So the ability to come to even just detail the facts. No one to start doing that, oh, you're becoming an investigative person. It's not. It's essential journalism, right? And that's kind of lost in the process.
I mean, that's also because we've degraded a generation of journalists. We don't have quality journalists around. Akar Patel, he made it very, after a debate of this nature, which was going on for a long time, and we were discussing solutions, he finally came down and told me, in the middle of the debate, that look, you can talk as much as you want, but the fact is you don't have quality people to write stories. Ultimately, it's lack of quality, lack of talent, which has been, despite the number of journalism schools, you have no clue how many journalists come in for internships into my organization or any other organization every year. And I can tell you 95% end up being PR agents, joining PR companies. Very few actually are committed to journalism and end up being in journalism. And there is a serious dearth of talent.
Veeraraghav, this is across sectors.
I was just going to say, this sounded like
but it's
but
it's dangerous in journalism because because of the power that you get by being Arnab Goswami. Yeah. If you are a not talented Arnab Goswami, think about the devastation you can bring.
Okay, thank you very much to the panelists. Now the experts have spoken. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the finest hour for you. For the next 30 minutes, we request you to put in your questions and the experts will answer it. I must just mention that Mr. Veeraraghav may have to leave at 11 o'clock. So let us get as much from him as possible before
we
the
have
time.
a Hindu event that's going on today.
Okay. Now, there are two questions that have come in. And here's the first question from Santosh. Santosh says, with an ever-increasing number of news channels and other mediums, they have an obligation of showing an uninterrupted coverage of news 24/7 to remain relevant in current scenario. Media will continue to become more powerful in coming days. So there is an urgent requirement of an effective regulatory body to monitor the quality of news and unbiased coverage of events. Your comments.
It's dangerous to just say regulatory body in India because we don't know what that regulatory body will do. But so it's important to evolve a very, I think Siddharth, lawyers, economists, they will have to come together, not so much journalists, but, to evolve something that is self-regulatory, which has a public, which is very democratic, which is very transparent, but which has the iron grip as well. Ultimately, there is a definite need for that, something on the lines of Ofcom without the government's involvement in it. Because either you have it directly monitored by the Supreme Court of India. There's been which is again dangerous as that. But or you have a body like the Election Commission of India, which can look at which is far more independent in terms of appointment of one person.
No, I agree with you that there's the word regulation or regulatory body in India unfortunately takes on a negative view because it becomes very intrusive, and more than that, it becomes very bureaucratic. You'll end up with forms and documents and the rest. But there are a couple of regulatory bodies that have actually succeeded. If I can look at it, say, from the economic side, the commercial side, SEBI has largely been able to do that. The RBI actually is the best example of an independent regulatory body. right? And its framework analysis goes back 50, 60 years, is essentially an ability to have control over your own affairs, and the appointment process is transparent. So the same thing needs to be there. You know, we have media regulatory bodies which are toothless. I mean, look at our own Bar Council of India, which is a regulatory body for us, is completely politicized, right? It does nothing, frankly, right? Now, so if there is need for some kind of oversight, if I can call it that, and I use the word oversight in the American phraseology, that is to oversee, not to disregard or overlook, right?
Not to micromanage.
Not to micromanage. But I think the elements to that regulatory system, quote unquote, lies in prescribing 4 broad corners that the media cannot cross. One, for example, is the ownership disclosure.
Chomsky has laid down those 4 broad corners: ownership, advertisement. What are my other 2 filters? How can I forget?
Yeah, what are those 4 filters? Yeah.
See, one is ownership, advertising. That's through revenues through advertising.
Yes.
So flack, which is what the government can throw at you in terms of defamation cases. Then the anti-communism, he calls it those days, but that is basically the public sentiment. And the 5th filter is, I'm suddenly not able to recollect the 5th filter. That's
No, but those are absolute essential markers. Now, whether that will work in a country as diverse as India is another question. Because, for example, you take the issue of the ability for a government to slap a defamation, or anyone to slap a defamation suit against the media is now very much more, I think it's a much better situation thanks to the striking down of Section 66A of our Information Technology Act, because no one today can go and say, oh, you said something which hurts me. You have to prove something else. It's much more. Now whether that will engender, I think the point Veeraraghav is making is, the only way to be able to regulate all of this is through self-regulation, not by a top-down approach, is to have a system of markers which will then force the media itself into some kind of self-regulation, which should not become self-censorship. That's all.
And what needs to be done is very clear. Whatever Ofcom has done, you do it, and you possibly, as you're suggesting, do it in the way SEBI does it for the stock exchange. I mean, I think something of that nature needs to be evolved and needs to be evolved.
See, the problem with us, with the regulatory bodies, is that we always stumble from one to the other. We have some good regulatory bodies which have grown and evolved over time. It's taken 20 years for SEBI to be where it is today. It took the Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority 15 years to get to where it is today. Extremely well-respected regulatory bodies. But you take a look at what's happening to the Lokpal. I mean, we haven't had an appointment in the last 1 year. And so how do you hope that the system will engender itself? Now, of course, the big question is with the national judicial appointments, but anyway, that's a separate debate for a separate day, But
the little bit of juggling in the questions I have to do, because Veeraraghav has to leave in a few minutes. This question is specially addressed to you, sir, and this is from Dr. Samir Kagalkar. And Dr. Samir says, the cable channel, in their options given to consumers, club new and entertainment into a single category. Is this very subtly suggestive? What news has become? Not a truth in seeking activity, but a TRP event. I think you've already answered that.
Yeah, I think I've answered that, but I can just tell you that there is also a genuine thing. We must look at it from a larger thing of not just cable channel, but just look at any of the news organizations. Times Television has Zoom TV, which is all part of their ownership, and they call it their bouquet as a television network. Network 18 owns Viacom 18, owns Colors, and they call it part of their bouquet. So news is a part of their bouquet. And if you were to ever sit in one of those board meetings, I've laughed my guts out at it. The way they say, our news is our pepper and salt on the larger main platter that we're offering. So whether you like it or not, whether people will admit it or not, ultimately it's the truth, and it's not just that. But having said that, that is what the owners and the businessmen do. Have journalists also treating themselves as entertainment? That's a question I'll say there are 2 different aspects to it. There are some journalists who believe and they're going after entertainment and their TRPs, and that's a very dangerous trend. It's always been that way from down to the British press during the earlier days. It's not about the owners, it's about the journalists. And I think where we have weakened is that journalists have become power seekers. Journalists have become entertainers and they want TRPs. And that's sad and dangerous. And unfortunately, the journalists that we are talking about who are great today were people who were created by good and great journalism. I mean, let's not forget that it was a Kargil reporting or whatever else that creates one set of people. It was a reporting on Gujarat riots that created a particular personality. And these are all, I'm not saying daredevil reporting in terms of what we've seen outside, but there was a time when India did represent great journalists and they were, they had their standing in the society. Unfortunately, these great journalists have turned themselves into entertainers.
The third question, I would like to address it to Dr. Vinod. And here is the question, Dr. Vinod. There seems to be some sort of an overreach on the part of the media today. They're donning the mantle of the supreme guardian of rights, ethics, all. Your comments, Doctor.
Well, that would be an overreach. The supreme guardian of our rights are the courts. So to that extent it is, but they definitely have a role in exposing events that lead to a violation of rights. I would interpret overreach as when the press does not report things that are violations of rights.
Correct.
When it begins to look or report in such a way that something has happened but it's not really important. And these things are going on very much. If you look at, for example, the coverage of the Environment Ministry nowadays, they're appreciative of the fact that some 500 clearances have been given since the government came into office. But nobody has looked into what is the content of those, have they watered down the criteria? If it is just efficiency, I applaud it. But if it is a watering down under political and other pressures, that's something else. And this is something the press has not done so far.
No, I agree. I think nothing to add. I think that's absolutely right. There is no question of an overreach, and if you underreport or you choose to highlight one over another, that's a more dangerous trend. And I don't think it's a question of judging. They say that there's a media trial.
Yeah.
I mean, as long as the guys who ultimately take decisions, i.e. the courts, are not influenced by a media trial, then we are fine. Then that's what journalism is all about. I mean, the media is all about.
Well, it should ask searching questions, and those who are asked the questions have to answer them.
Yeah.
There are quite a number of questions here, and maybe Raja, you would like to tackle this. This is from Kundan Lal, and Kundan Lal asks, media, I think he means media is now powerful, but they are also used unethical, unsocial, and unlawful and illegal practices, malpractices, he says, for not covering important event and incidents, and charging huge amounts to remain silent many a time. What are the remedy to make media humble and faithful to their viewers and followers?
Firstly, I don't quite understand what you mean when he says charging. Okay, well, if you're talking of having your sponsors dictate editorial content, then one of the ways to make them to be more even-handed is to have regulations which talk about what they can say and what kind of sources of funding exist, etc. Unethical, unsocial, unlawful. See, unlawful and illegal, I mean, those are practices which clearly the law should step in. For instance, if someone in the media is actually paying someone off to give a soundbite or whatever, I think that's clearly something that must be put an end to. See, the problem that we have is we can make a lot of things illegal, but ultimately if we don't enforce the sanctions against illegalities, people will run scot-free and they will have no fear of the law, right? So this all well and good to say prescribe, but prescribe and then enforce as well. I think self-regulation is the only way to make sure that unethical and unsocial stuff, anti-social stuff is actually kept out of the media. I would say that, because ultimately you can't, if someone is a crook, no amount of law is going to turn him into a saint.
But there is also a question of what is ethical and what is lawful. One of the things we all like in this country is the sting operation. A lot of things that have come out as a result of sting operations. But in Australia, for example, that would be unlawful. You cannot conduct a sting operation in Australia. But the reason for that is there is also an ethical context in which a society works.
Yeah.
And so long as overall society functions to a certain ethical standard, you can have a law like that. In our country, we say one thing, we do another. And therefore, the sting operation has become essential. I would love to have a situation in this country where we don't need sting operations at all because people behave. It doesn't mean there are no differences, but a certain level of ethical behavior.
Hope Kundan, you like that answer. Now, here's another one. I read newspapers, magazines, and also see TV. I find the print media going at a sedate pace. It's the TV medium, the electronic medium, that appears to be fast-paced and wanting to dominate and hog the limelight, as it were. Your comments, please. Raja?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I think we've been talking about how the television, simply by the sheer nature of the medium, is more appealing, and so therefore seems to be more over the top, if you can call it that. But I don't think it is a question of hogging the limelight. It's how much you want it to dominate your views, ultimately. You are the recipient. You can cut it out if you so wish, right? To my mind, the print media is naturally going to be that much more sedate because it's not live in that sense of the word. But a more important media, which I think is, if you read between the lines here, is not just the television vis-a-vis the print. The other online media is a hugely influential aspect to the determination of opinion. People learn, and I'll be honest, I myself read and understand a lot more on subjects because of what people post on Facebook. Links. Hey, have you seen this article? Have you seen that article? There's a critical article here. And in independent media. So I was talking about Scroll or Fountain Ink. There's a great amount of creation of opinion which occurs away from the television. I look at the TV and say, I know, I just listen to it and okay, fine, you have to put it away, so to speak. If you start getting influenced by that alone, that's the problem. It's the viewer's perception of what is important, which is critical, I think, to the understanding of this question. Really, you can listen to it, pass it through one ear and out the other kind of thing, right, without it making any impact on you. But what you read and what you perhaps are able to digest more easily is the one that stays with you. That's the problem with the electronic media and going after the TRP. You only hear screaming and shouting on most channels, unfortunately. The debate is completely lost. So, for instance, I would turn on and listen to a Karan Thapar moderating a debate. He was moderating a debate on China-India relations recently. And I think an hour or so later, there was something else on one of the other channels. It was chalk and cheese, the difference. Simply from my perspective, saying I understood and I learned a lot more from this. But there are people out there who want to see this. I'm having a drink or having my meal, and I want to see the antics of Arnab Goswami on television. So really, I think whether someone dominates or not is not the media's fault. It's really the viewer's fault in allowing it to be him or her to be dominated.
Thank you, Raja. Here's another question, and Dr. Vinod, maybe you'd like to answer this. Media attracts a lot of young people. Is it possible that the jingoism and insensitivity that it demonstrates could be due to a lack of experience?
Well, it's also a lack of ethical standards to a large extent. I think jingoism is bad wherever you are. You have to be much more nuanced in what you're doing. But when you say the Prime Minister goes to Pakistan and shakes hands with Nawaz Sharif for 20 seconds, and you say that he shook hands with Obama for 30 seconds, and therefore this kind of nonsense keeps going on. I think to a large extent it is not young people, it is that these are people with very poor education. I think it is people who might have degrees but who have not learned to internalize what they say. And I would love to see them fall by the wayside. But then the TRP system may not go that way. But when a television channel has a correspondent who's in Beijing and behaves as if the correspondent is making foreign policy, I think all we should do is laugh at it.
Just to add to that, it actually goes back to a root of education and learning that exists across all sectors.
Yes.
I find that even in the law. People come with, great ideas of legal principles or some newfangled things. They come and I'm a corporate lawyer, so I get new associates joining us talking about structured debt, mezzanine finance. They say, hold on. Before you can, go to the cake, let's try and make the dough first.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's make the dough, and which is your facts ultimately are what it is. And yes, obviously more experienced people in terms of the number of years can crunch facts better, perhaps, right? But if you don't know what those facts are, and more importantly, you have very little ability to find out the facts. That's the critical thing, right? And history actually is an extremely important, I would hope that most television anchors and other people on television especially have a sense of history. None of them do, You take the guy, Stephen Sacker, who does Hard Talk on BBC. He clearly has a sense of history. He knows his facts and he links it to historical events which occurred. And yes, you might say, he's living in the past, but the truism that if you fail to learn history of condemned to repeated kind of thing lies in that. So, for example, if a young journalist is reporting on the Nepal earthquake, have you spent at least half an hour trying to understand, for instance, when was the last earthquake that occurred in Nepal? How did they react to it? Have you tried to understand the situation in the last 10 years in Nepal? They've been going through a huge constitutional flux. A government is not responsive in many respects. Then you would immediately say, okay, I'm not going to ask a question, has the government responded? The government hasn't responded. You can ask a more nuanced question, which you need to know and be able to find out, I think.
Thank you very much, Raja. We have to run a bit fast because there are a few more questions here. Are people misusing the media in India? Does that lead to a lot of people being framed?
Well, if A can misuse the media, so can B. And the question of being framed, in order to be framed, we have to be guilty.
Yeah, correct. I agree.
So to that extent, I think if they put you in a spot and force you to answer, that's a good thing. I don't think anybody should be spared the ordeal of having to answer tough questions.
Absolutely.
That is something you must do.
Absolutely.
But that's not being framed. I think that is part of being in public life and being responsible. If you want to get elected, then answer the questions of those who vote for you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Doc. Here's another question. Many times I have seen abrasiveness, some amount of arrogance on the part of the TV anchor. The anchor continues to prosper and there appears to be no censure about the way he conducts proceedings. Is there a story here?
Well, murderers have become kings. So that's what it is. Yes, they're arrogant, but that means they're stupid. They're probably not good journalists.
Let me say this, and I think Veeraraghav, or you mentioned it, Doctor, that we talk, all of this debate in this particular mind is probably in the English medium. I don't know what happens, for instance, at Enadu television, or at Vijaya TV, or at, whatever, Jaya TV, or whatever it might be. But talking of the English channels on this, who do you see on the English channels? You see the same suspects every day.
Every day.
You want a spokesman from X party, there are two people to choose from. You want a spokesman, quote unquote, quote, from civil society, you have two people to choose. And then you have these page 3 types, the socialites who will come and give you the more nuanced cultural view. But, that's a whole clique, right? It's a little cabal that goes on there. That's the point Veeraraghav made, actually, that you've reduced, especially the electronic media, to nothing but a little clique. To further your own interests, I will bring Mr. X spokesman and Mr. Y political lobbyist in Delhi because then I will be known to know these people and therefore promote myself a little.
And they will use the media to go seek a partner.
So that's the story, exactly. So that's the story here. It's all self-aggrandizement, unfortunately. That's true, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. I think there is time enough just to tackle 2 more questions, and here is the first one. If you want a wrongdoing to be publicized, investigated, take it to the media. But before this takes place, the issue is sensationalized. We often hear the words, it's a creation of media. Why so?
Well, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure what this question is asking. It is the media's job to expose things that happen, to report facts. Now, if they prejudge it, they don't show the different sides of the question, then it is bad reporting. But I'm also not very sure about the situation in this country. For example, the whole whistleblowers bill. If somebody wants to report large-scale corruption in some government department, you need protection. So there is another kind of debate that has to take place here.
No, but I think half-baked stories,
Yeah.
its creation of the media is half-baked. I'll give you a very small example. A few days ago, there was a huge hue and cry on media, or at least it appeared to be a huge hue and cry. See, ultimately, hue and cry depends on what you make out of it also. You know, about how a police officer in Delhi was seen to be hitting a lady with a brick for refusing to pay some bribe. But then it turned out that the lady, and this is, we don't know, the truth may lie in between. Apparently there is a story doing the rounds that the lady herself instigated the whole thing by calling him, she was perhaps in the wrong, perhaps, we don't know, perhaps in the wrong, and said something. And now we're not saying that justifies his reaction, but if the media report begins by saying,
he hurled a brick,
but she had instigated him, right? Then you know that that there are 2 sides to the story. You take this our chief minister going around and making statements about tender show. You immediately endorse his view.
Exactly.
Why don't you say he said it? But here's a counterpoint. The headlines in all the papers said CM agrees that roads are too narrow.
And is CM's opinion the truth?
So is the CM's opinion the truth? So if you half make a story, you present half the side, that's the creation of the media which I would recoil against. That's unfortunately what is happening. You have one more question.
The last question for the session, and this is from Kundan Lal again. And the question is, atrocities on female and misuse to give wrong assurance and rape cases are seen in film industry, but in media is also now seen affected very much of such cases. How to minimize such incident and make environment women friendly and not to give wrong assurance of career progression by adopting unethical practice. Would you like to answer this, Raja?
I might follow the question.
I don't follow the question either. But for example, I think the Nirbhaya incident in Delhi, it is public outrage that forced the media to take this. I think in that case, the media might or might not have covered. The public anger was such that they covered it.
Oh no, I think the question is, and I think what he's saying is the portrayal of women in our films industry and in other things is very degrading. Right, and that plays out in the media. How do we minimize that?
It's a continuation.
Yeah, I think to make environment women friendly. So it almost is. I think the question is, in films you show someone being hit, a woman being slapped, or you could progress by putting a woman down. How do you prevent that? Really, I think. I mean, it's just a question of awareness. I think it's education.
No, but it's also to some extent the films reflecting what is happening.
I think that's the question.
I think it goes both ways. Unless and until, as a society, we look at women differently, with greater respect, the films will show what is happening in society, and people will respond to that because they relate.
No, it's our attitudes. Let me give you an example without quoting this, without quoting any names. A few weeks ago, I heard a judge of one of the high courts mentioned this in the course of his presentation, that I was trying to help a lady who had been recently divorced, and I told her, you're only 40, ma'am, you'll find another husband. That's the problem. We say we must respect our women, but yes, we don't slap them, we don't make sexual innuendos against them. But this is the attitude.
And it's a judge.
Is this the attitude? And it's a judge. Is this the attitude that you want to promote? Now that's a larger question. It's got nothing to do with the media. What I'm saying is, especially women, if you want to change the view, it's Indian society's approach to women and how they look at them. That at 40, the only thing you can see in me is whether I can get married again. Is that the only thing? That's horrible. It's almost akin, and I don't know, I'll probably stir a riot if I mention this, is Stanley Walport talks about this in his biography on Jinnah. He says Jinnah was shocked when he was introduced to Gandhi, and Mahatma Gandhi had just come back from his stint when he was still MK Gandhi at that time, from his South African period. When at a public rally he said the Indian National Congress is proud to have different parts of different ethnicities and different communities in it because we're a national movement, and here is the Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Jinnah said, here I am dressed head to toe in Savile Row. I smoke a pipe, I eat pork, and the only thing that this man sees in me is that I'm a Muslim. It's the same thing. Here is a lady, and the only thing at 40 you can think of is that she can get married again. Now that's a view which seeps through society, and the media is a part of that. By the way, I said this not with a view to say anything against either MK Gandhi or in support of Jinnah, but I think it's a very powerful statement that your own prejudices, and Gandhi had his prejudices,
yes,
right? As we all do. We should not, if we state it, then the media is responsible to provide both sides of the story, right? And that's all. Don't editorialize, merely report.
I'm afraid this has to be the last and final question because we are reaching the end of our session, and this is again from Kundan Lal.
Excellent. I'm glad he's asking.
And Kundan Lal,
I only wish we could have heard him in person. Thank you so much.
And Kundan Lal's question, I read out. Presently, chairman of Z News, Dr. Subhash Chandra, is visiting almost most of the good universities and institution colleges and delivering series of lectures on different topics. But it is seen that the theme of different topic and subjects are almost one conclusion, that Dr. Subhash Chandra is the best and just showing his thought and belief and idea is best for the students of Indian University to follow. I am afraid where are other professional and eminent personalities in India who made India pride as compared to Dr. Subhash Chandra. I am reading the question as Kundan Lal has written.
But I'm very happy that Kundan Lal has seen through Subhash Chandra. I think if he has tried to pitch a particular point of view, he has not been successful. I think I'm very happy that he's been seen through.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I agree. And why do you see? The thing is, I'm sorry, I don't think this is necessarily got to do with the media. The problem with most universities, I can say this from my own experience, is that they are starved of good quality inputs other than from the faculty itself. The need to cross-fertilize, bring in other people in. And so if someone from the media is doing this, it's a good thing. Yeah. You take your view. You can say that there's some nice things and some bad things about what he said. But the fact that there's no one else, he's saying, I'm afraid, where are the other eminent personalities in India who could come and talk to students and do that? Today what we've done is actually a small microcosm of media in itself, right?
True.
That we bring people, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but each of us and perhaps even more. This GuruTalk series is a great example of trying to talk other than in the classroom, right? To bring different people in. And I think that's the role of the media really. I mean, if you had to take, I come back again to the BBC, and I think it's a great example of what can be achieved with a little bit of independence. Your Hard Talk series, they have superb people, different people from all walks of life. There's a clergyman. I once saw an interview by the previous guy of the Duke of one of the Archbishops of York or something. The first black Archbishop of York. Fantastic. And searching questions about abortion, about gay marriage. You have to ask these questions, and in any form. Even this is a forum for that. You bring other people, and it's not just media. You bring the IT czars of this country and ask them pointed. You ask them pointed questions. Why do you only talk about India, Bangalore? Why do you only want to talk about, tax benefits for the IT industry? I mean, there's several things like that, that media is not doing. Where do we have the equivalent of a hard talk? And it really must be a hard talk. Karan Thapar does it to some extent. He rubs people the wrong way, of course, because he's a little bit abrasive at times in some of his questioning. But that's a good example of having someone sitting across the table. Arnab Goswami does this through his frankly speaking, but frankly, it's more like, haranguing. Veeraraghav was talking about how Raj Thackeray was responding to Arnab Goswami. He turns around and says, haven't you heard what I just told you? You keep asking the same questions 50 times differently. I'm not going to tell you again. That's not it. But hard talk on the other hand is, you said this 25 years ago, you're doing something else differently. Why?
Not only that, based upon what they say, your next question. So it's a thinking interview.
It's a thinking interview.
It is not you've got a set of questions. He says something that is different from what you expected. You respond. So in other words, you have to do a lot of homework.
Correct. It's almost like going prepared to a class and you know what I'm talking about. You have to go prepared to class.
True.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kundarlal.
Thank you, absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasant duty to thank on your behalf and on behalf of all of us here, Dr. Vinod Vyasalu and Mr. Siddharath Raja. I have already thanked Mr. Veeraraghav, who had to leave early for a prior engagement that he is committed to. And you'll agree that the distinction and articulation that the panel demonstrated has enhanced our learning and our takeaways from this session. I'll be failing in my duty if I were not to tell you that a whole lot of people have worked for the success of this session behind the scenes. Our technology team, our camera team, our delivery team, and again on your behalf and on my behalf, I'd like to extend my warmest gratitude and thanks to them for making this session successful.
Thank you.
And I must thank you to having come in such large numbers, asking some very interesting questions. I hope you enjoyed yourself and you're carrying back some good takeaways from this session. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.